just never know. You just go along figuring some things don't change ever. Like being able to drive on a public highway without somebody trying to murder you. And then one stupid thing happens. And it's like there you are, right back in the jungle again. My God.
I'd like to report a truck driver that's been endangering my life.
I was sitting around the office one day looking through scripts, continuing to write, trying to get my feature film ideas off the ground, trying to get somebody to hire me. And my assistant, Nona Tyson, found Duel. She said, I read this article, this short story by Richard Matheson in Playboy magazine. I said, what do you think reading Playboy magazine, Nona? Are you kidding? She said, no. But she said, I love the fiction. And she said, I want you to read the short story. I think this is right up your alley. And I read the short story and I said, wow. This is terrifying. This is like a Hitchcock movie. It's like Psycho with the birds, only it's on wheels. A truck chasing a salesman through the desert. And she said, well, I also found out that Richard Matheson is writing a screenplay that they're going to do as a movie of the week, and it's being produced by George Eckstein. She gave me all this information. So I called up George Eckstein, who didn't know me from Adam, knew of me because they used to call me Scheinberg's Folly, because I was the young kid he had hired. I think was the youngest person ever signed under a term contract in Universal's history. And I wasn't really that highly regarded. I was this abstract kind of young person that only loved lenses and dolly shots and didn't know anything about acting. That's at least the reputation I had then. And I called George Eckstein up and I said, I've read this short story, haven't read the script yet, I'd love to talk to you about this. And so he invited me over to his office and he asked for me to bring the work I was proudest of, so you can see an example of my most recent work. So I brought over the rough cut of Columbo, which hadn't even aired yet, but I brought the rough cut over. And I left him with the rough cut after we had his conversation. He saw the cut. Then he called me back to his office and he said, okay, give me your ideas and how you'd like to make this into a movie. And he gave me the script of Duel. And I read the script and I came back, had another meeting with George, gave him all my ideas. And he said, well, I'll get back to you. And a day went by, 2 days went by, I didn't hear a thing. On the third day, I got a call from George who said, okay, I'd like you to direct this. It was like the greatest phone call. It was the second greatest phone call I ever had. The first being when Scheinberg called me and got me out of college to be a director. And the second one was when Eckstein called me and said, I'd like you to direct Duel. And that's sort of how it all began. Dennis's name came up. I immediately said, oh my God, it's gotta be Dennis Weaver. And I just went nuts. And George said, why are you so hot on Dennis Weaver? I said, you never saw Touch of Evil? You never saw The Motel Caretaker? It's the greatest. I went on, and I remember George saying, he was pretty good as Chester in Gunsmoke. I said, yeah, that was great, but look at the character roles he played in the movies, because I was a big fan of his from that one film. He reached a level of anxiety and panic in Touch of Evil and paranoia that I envisioned David Mann, the character he was playing in Duel, arriving at in the last act of the story. The trucks that were on the back lot were the more flat-nosed, blunted trucks, the ones that didn't really form anything but a large, kind of conical cab where the window went straight down to the headlights. There was no engine sticking out in front. The engine was probably in the back. If you just tipped the cab forward, you could see the engine behind the driver's seat. I think that's how those trucks worked in those days. I'm not sure, but my eye went right to the one truck, and I said, you got the part. First of all, I didn't quite know how I was going to achieve this in 10 days. They were giving me 10 days to shoot about 73 minutes of film with commercials that fills out the hour and a half of the ABC Movie of the Week format. I didn't quite know how I could do this thing in 10 days. A production manager named Wallace Worsley. And Wallace was kind of gruff and tough. He was a pussycat on the inside, but on the outside he was a gruff and tough person who looked at me and often gave these derisive snorts of, yeah, prove it. Prove you can make this into a movie, because if you can't, your history, son, will bring somebody else in who can. And I really respected that he took a hard-line position with me, because I said to him, I'm going to shoot this all on location. And he said to me, you cannot shoot a movie of this scale on location in 10 days. You need to send somebody else out to shoot all these plates and do it on a soundstage with process. And I said, Wally, I don't want to shoot this if I have to go inside. It's going to look fake. You can look out all the windows of the car. It won't be a chase. It'll be a guy comfortably sitting on a soundstage with bad process out the windows, which is always out of sync with the way the grips move the car. The car moves this way, the process goes that way. It never works. And Wally said, if you spend the first half of the first day of shooting plates, so we have those banked, and then if you stay on schedule for the first 3 days, then you can shoot the whole thing on location. Otherwise, you got to come back to the studio. And I said, okay. Bugs that I put into the grill of the truck and splattered dead bugs across the windshield. Things like that took the time, but things like that created the suspense. They said, let's plot the entire 74-minute film on an overhead map so I can just plot my cameras. So we did kind of like a architect's overhead plan of all the highways in Pear Blossom and Soledad Canyon and Sand Canyon out in Palmdale where I shot Duel, and put all of these incidents, the cafe, the phone booth, and the snake farm, all the incidents or the set pieces along the road of the narrative on this big overhead map. And it was a huge mural. It wrapped around the entire motel room that I was given to stay in for the time I shot on location. But I was able to every single day make notes on the map and plot what the menu was going to be to achieve that day, the day's work that I needed to achieve in order to stay on schedule and make a really good movie. I was able to do it from a bird's eye view looking straight down. I didn't really so much do individual storyboard frames. That would come later in my work, but on this film, that overview really helped me understand where I was. So when I jumped out of continuity, I knew exactly where I was. He had plenty of time to get out, and it was practiced and rehearsed over and over and over again. And there was all sorts of fail-safe points. There were these stakes in the ground. And Kerry Lofton had his eye on little flags, which off camera, that meant the point of no return. That meant that if Kerry did not see Dennis leave the phone booth by the time the grill of his truck got to that red flag, Kerry simply was going to abort to the left. And there still would have been a lot of clearance between the booth and Kerry's aborted driving. But Dennis did it just at the right time. We only did it once. I didn't want to tempt fates and do it a second time. And it was just an extraordinary shot, and that had to be the only shot used. I don't think I saw any dailies because I was living out in Pear Blossom the entire time I was shooting Duel with the company. There was no time to really see dailies out there. We couldn't go back into town and see dailies, so I was just relying on lab reports to say that there was no hair in the gate and no negative scratches and the film was exposed properly, and I was relying on Jack Marta to tell me if he thought it was going to be okay, and I really relied on his expertise and his years of wisdom being a really good DP. But when the movie was over, I was kind of almost like a little bit of nostalgia, and I stuck that same sound effect into the last scene where the shark is blown up and the big carcass is sinking to the bottom of the ocean. That sound reoccurs there. I put the sound at the same point that the fin of the shark comes out of the cloud of blood, like the truck came out of the cloud of dirt. And it was a little bit of a self-congratulatory pat on the back, but it was also kind of like saying, gee, thank you, Duel, for putting me on the map. Gee, thanks for giving me a career. And thanks for getting me started making movies, because without Duel, I wouldn't have gotten the green light to make Sugar Land Express when I did. So, you know, one thing always helps another, and I was just sort of turning backwards in time, having finished Jaws, to say thank you, Duel, for letting me have Jaws. Duel unlocked the gateways of the continent of Europe. I never had been to Europe before, and I went to Europe for the first time. It was amazing. You know, nonstop flight from New York to Rome. Got to see the Spanish Steps, stay at the Hassler Hotel, and meet Federico Fellini the next day, who had just seen Duel. And I'm very proud of a picture I have that was taken the day after he saw Duel and has his arm around me. We're standing in front of the Grand Hotel. I look like I'm as skinny as a rail, you know, and he looks as thin as he ever looked. And we're standing together, and we became friends from that moment on and had infrequent but still contact from that time on. It haunted me because when my first feature came out, which was about cars, again, the same critics said that Spielberg was attenuating those themes and carrying them even further. I was proving their point by making the Sugar Land Express. But that's fine, because you know what it teaches you to do? It teaches you not to think so reasonably. It taught me to think a little more in the abstract. It really instructed me not to just look at something and say, okay, everybody is bound to see this picture the way I see this picture. We're going to see the same colors, the same sky and horizon. We're going to interpret this exactly alike. And I learned very early on that nobody ever sees the same picture the same way. It's impossible. I'm probably not the best kind of judge of how many sides I have as a picture maker. One film I can say I indulge myself in that. That was for me, or that's for the audience. That's popcorn, and that's brain food. I don't know if I'm the best judge of that, really, because I take all my movies seriously. I took Raiders of the Lost Ark seriously. I had to. I had to believe the story was really happening. If I thought it was a romp and a confection, then the film would have been a parody of the serials from the 1950s and 40s. But I took that story very, very seriously, and I wanted the audience to believe that Indiana Jones was actually going after the lost Ark of the Covenant, and when that Ark opened, the power of God was within and was going to wreak havoc on the Nazis. I mean, I believe that stuff, and I don't think you can be a filmmaker, a serious filmmaker, making audience popcorn movies unless you believe the stories you're telling, to be working on subjects like that. But also, I couldn't have made Schindler's List or Private Ryan when I was 22, 23 years old either. So it's a fair trade-off.